Board of Directors here, and I'd like to welcome you. Is anybody here a first-time visitor? Well, welcome. We are delighted that you're here with us. So glad to have you here. I'd like to start by pledging allegiance to the flag. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And if we could have a moment of silence, please, for our veterans, thinking about our veterans, thinking about Winnie's mother, who was a veteran. Thank you. Thank you for signing in. We like to keep track of how many people have attended our programs. This is our last program of the season. Our next program is going to be all the way in March. It's going to be on March 17th, so you all have to wear green if you come in. Our programs are deeply held secrets, which you will find out early if you are a member of the Historical Society. We'll be sending out a list of our programs in this membership directory. And we covet your membership. We would love to have you as a supporter of the Historical Society. $25 a year for dues, and we need more members. So please consider that. We have more of these brochures on the outside of the door as you leave. So a little bit of business for those of you who are members here. We had sent out a ballot in October for election of our new board of directors, and hearing no objections to that ballot, the following people have been reelected for 2025. So if you're here, I think there's a lot of people are here. Linda Everly, she's back in the back. Dave Rice, right here. Ron Wilbert, I don't think I saw him tonight. And Don Zerfie, I'm not sure he was able to be here tonight. Kim Bear, me, Brenda Crady, back there in Norris Treasure. Mary Nolt, standing out there in the door. And Ned Sterling, and Alyssa Zavalis. So that is our board. So congratulations to those folks who have been reelected. We meet monthly, and we are a working board. So I appreciate each one. We need help with Winterfest. So Ned, do you want to pass around
Yeah, we're going to have a stand at Winterfest, which is December 7th. That's a Saturday. It's going to be on Main Street, and it's going to kind of usher in the Christmas season. We're going to be set up from 1 to 5, and we have a 1-hour shift, a 1-hour increment. If you'll be able to join us and help us out during that Saturday, December 7th. So I'll pass this around, and if you're interested, you can. There's already some names on here, so don't let that discourage you.
You get to talk to a lot of people. It's fun. All right, after the program, you are invited to stay for refreshments, and of course, feel free to take a tour of our museum next door. And this is also part of our museum, if you've noticed. I was talking to Winnie. I'll let Jean Ellis introduce our speaker this evening, but I was talking to her earlier, and she pointed out one of our pieces that we have. Anybody else wear one of these in gym class? Little green bloomers. Winnie said she wore one of these, and I wore one, and Jean said she wore one. Brenda wore one back there. We had these really attractive green bloomers that went with them, and God bless my mother, she ironed these things. So how times have changed. All right, I'm going to ask Jean if she'll come and introduce our speaker.
I think it's appropriate that Winterfest is on December 7th this year, and which is also when the attack of Pearl Harbor happened, and also my son's 51st birthday. I thought he was destined to win the Navy, but instead he's an entomologist in New York City. Anyway, our speaker is Winnie Woll, right here, Winifred Woll. She is the daughter of Teresa Stauffer Foster, and Teresa was an Army nurse stationed at Tripler Army Hospital in Oahu, Hawaii, at the time of the attack on Pearl Harbor. Like a lot of her men comrades who have been through battle, Teresa did not share her experiences until later in life. She was a lifelong resident of Lancaster, except for 2 years in the military. Now, Winnie is a resident. She grew up in Lancaster, went to Catholic high school. You wore a green gym uniform at Lancaster Catholic. Did I really? It would be like purple and gold or something. But anyway, she's now a resident of St. Lawrence Borough in Berks County. She's a 1961 grad of Lancaster Catholic, and she accompanied her mother to the 50th anniversary of Pearl Harbor in 1991. She would like me to mention that Teresa, her mother, graduated from St. Joseph's Nursing School and worked as a nursing supervisor for many years at Lancaster Osteopathic Hospital, and was a lifelong member of Sacred Heart Church in Lancaster. Her mother died in 1999, and then Winnie started to document other nurses' stories. So please welcome Winifred Woll to Mount Joy.
Okay, I'm kind of a loud yeller, I think, from what I've been told. So it's been a pleasure to be invited here today, and hopefully I can tell my story and you'll be able to spread it around to other people too. I'm going to start with asking how many men here, or women, were military. So we had quite a few. So I'm very glad to say thank you for your service, especially during this month of November where we're celebrating all the veterans. So thank you. Now I'm going to start my talk, which is basically about the women talking about some of the men, because we get started here. In 2018, we had service up in the Capitol. And as you see from this picture, it was run by the staff of the Navy Reserve Corps. Now, up until a couple of years before that, the Pearl Harbor Survivors Association ran the organization, the meeting. But these men died off so quickly that the Navy took over, so we were thankful for that. But in 2018, you see in the very front row on this side, four of the men. And the ones you're going to look at the top there are Dick Schimmel, and then Henry Heim from New Cumberland, and William Benelli from down toward Philadelphia, and Isaac George from out around Pittsburgh. So these men were sitting at that ceremony. The other man, Alexander Horowitz, was from Philadelphia, and he was down at the Valley Forge ceremony that they had the same day. So in 2018, we had 5 Pearl Harbor survivors. Let me jump ahead by 2 years, because we got into the COVID and everything was shut down. So for 2 years we had nothing. we went into 2000. Pardon me, but there we go. In 2000, I just had Dick Schimmel and Isaac George. Now, I hate to say this, Dick Schimmel, who was a very dear friend of mine from up in Allentown, died in February of this year. So it's very sad to say goodbye to him. And Isaac George is now 102 years old. How many years I am going to have him, I don't know. We are now down nationally to about, I think, 20 Pearl Harbor survivors in all of the United States. So very shortly, that event is going to be wiped off the face of the earth. I'm seeing it already with organizations. The one in Harrisburg has completely wiped out the December 7th ceremony. They say, oh, you can come to the vet ceremony. That's all you need. And I'm seeing, when I go to the Valley Forge one now, we had trouble getting that organized this year. So it's getting very difficult to keep these stories alive. So with that said, let's get on to the women. Here we go. The first one you're going to see is on Memorial Day of 1991. You have Lenore Trell Ricketts, and she is going to introduce the President of the United States, George H.W. Bush. But now she's standing at the podium, and she decided, since she is the person at the podium, she is going to take advantage that everybody is going to listen to her words. And to quote what she said, "I'm sure you're up here wondering why this gray-haired old lady is up here on Memorial Day to address the crowd. Well, it's because somebody just discovered 50 years later that there were women at Pearl Harbor on December 7th. You hear so many stories told about the men. You heard very few stories, even today, you hear very few stories about the women of Pearl Harbor. Now think about it. What was it like for these women to be in the military in 1941? Now they were about 24 years old, roughly about 24, just coming out of nursing school. So think about what it was like. They might have had relatives in the military. So their father or their uncles or maybe even their brothers served in World War I. And now they wanted to follow in the same footsteps as those people. So they decided that they were going to enlist in the military, in either the Army or the Navy Corps. Now, they also like to explore the world. Think about when you were 24 years old. Didn't you want to explore the world? Did you have the money to do it? A lot of them didn't have it. So you know what they did? They wrote and asked their Uncle Sam to finance this. And Uncle Sam was very pleased to do it. So he sent them all around the world touring. Now, some of these women did have a military career. They went for the 25 years that is considered a military career. Then we had other women that served for the 2 years that they were enlisting for. And then you had the in-between. Some served for 5 years, some for 10, some for 7. It all depended. So we had kind of a mixed group of women that did whatever they would find comfortable for them. Now, the last one, did you get a good laugh out of that? Think about 1941. What was the goal of women in 1941? You were told that you were to get married and to raise a family. That was the goal of the family. And a lot of these women in the military heard this. And they figured, well, if I have to do it, why not go into the military and have that nice ratio of men to women and find the right husband? And a lot of these women, I have about three in this story that actually did find an absolutely wonderful husband that the marriage lasted until his death. So it was an absolutely wonderful pairing of people. In 1941, when you think about the prices of everything around you at that time, when you look at the prices for the women receiving $75 a month, that was quite a lot of money at that time. And these women were able to get free food, free clothing, free housing. The money was theirs to do whatever they wanted with it. So they were able to absolutely enjoy the island, or they were able to send the money back home, whichever worked for that family. So it was theirs to do what they felt like. And we have the difference is when you came in. Now I concentrate on the Army, which would be Harriet Moore. She was in the Army. But the Navy was basically similar. So I'm not comparing back and forth between the two. When you think about it, coming in as a new first lieutenant, you received $75 a month. And then as you raised in the rank, then you raised your price a little bit higher. So it was good to keep working a little bit higher at getting your higher goals. But even at that time, it was a lot more money than what they were getting in the hospitals. And that was one of their goals, to go into the military. The duty stations I talk about very quickly because when I start talking about the women, I will get into the detail of each of the duty stations. The first one is the USS Solace, and it was anchored in the harbor on December 7th. The Navy Hospital was located within walking distance from as it comes in Pearl Harbor, as the ocean comes into Pearl Harbor. Right there at that point is where the Naval Hospital was. And Schofield, well, let me jump to Tripler. Tripler Army Hospital was located within walking distance of Honolulu. And Hickam Army Hospital, did you hear me say Army? It didn't turn into Navy Hospital until 1947. So at this point it was the Army Hospital. And that was located within walking distance of Pearl Harbor. And then we jump over to Schofield. Schofield Army Hospital was located in the west side of the island of Oahu, up in the mountains. So it gives you an idea of where all these things happened. The whole entire Oahu was hit by the bombs and the gunfire on December 7th. It wasn't just Pearl Harbor. Now, go back to 1941 and 24 years old. What do you do when you're single and you're 24 years old and you're on this beautiful, peaceful island of Oahu? Do you have fun?
Yeah.
These women definitely had a lot of fun. So the first picture you see is over on the left side, and that's Teresa Stauffer, and she just got off the ship coming from the stateside. And when she arrived, the kapunas, the elderly grandmothers, were meeting these people coming off the ship and putting these leis around their neck, a symbol of friendship. So the leis are very considered symbols of friendship. The lady next to her is Helen Fermansky. And Helen Fermansky is sitting at the Minihuni fish pond on the island of Kauai. And the Minihunis were considered these little imaginary creatures that the Hawaiians believed in. And if you treated the Minihunis nice, they treated you nice. If you didn't treat them nice, you were in big, big trouble. So a lot of the Hawaiians took very good care of what they did for the little Minihunis, leaving them little favors here and there. The bottom picture It's just like in a dormitory. What do the people do in the dormitory? They gather before bedtime and have some food and have some drinks and just gather and talk to each other. And that's basically what these women also did during their time to get ready for bed. As I said before, in their free time, they loved to travel. And they basically went all over all the islands, all the Hawaiian islands. So here we have 3 ladies. We have Winnie Wilker on the left side, and then we have Teresa Stauffer in the middle, and we have Winnie Gibson on the other side. And these women are at the Sacred Falls on the island of Oahu. And they're, like everybody else, they're going and enjoying the culture of the island. So think about that. That's what they'd like to do. And I think you would have been in the same position if you were doing it. Now, I have a question. How many people have been to foreign countries? Oh, lots and lots of number of hands going up. May I pick on you because you're right in front of me? What country did you go to?
Several countries in Europe.
Give me one.
Germany.
Germany. So then I have to sprechen Sie Deutsch? I had to learn just a few of them. Okay. Did you learn any culture from that?
Absolutely.
That's good. That's good. Where was another hand? How about over here? Do we have somebody here? Okay.
Poland.
Okay, Poland. Poland. Did you learn some of the Polish culture?
Yes, I learned to appreciate what we have. They have very narrow
Uh-huh.
streets, they ride bikes, they can't afford.
Are you Polish heritage?
Pardon me?
Are you Polish heritage?
No.
Sometimes that makes it, you must learn that.
Yeah.
Okay, so that gives you an idea that when you go to another country, you're expected to learn the culture, right? Now remember, these women came into another country, Hawaii, before it became the United States. So, you're learning customs. Where's my dancing partner? I think my dancing partner's sitting there. Now you're seeing Teresa Stauffer in her special costume. And they basically dress the nurses up around October, take a picture, and be able to send it back to their hometown. And remember, this is a time where to get things back to Pennsylvania, you had to put it on a ship, and then on the train, and then somehow a bus or whatever to get back home. So it was taken somewhere around October. And I think this was the last time, and the only time she put this skirt on. But then I say about the culture and then finding the culture. She loved to go to the hooky lows. And the hooky lows were where they throw the netting into the ocean, pull back whatever fish comes from that, and then cook it and just have a wonderful party. And she loved those. So she did learn some of the culture.
This is your mother?
That was my mother, yes. So,
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan.
well, you heard this speech that was given by President Roosevelt the second day after, the day after Pearl Harbor attack. And I don't talk a lot about the attack because there's books written, there's videos, there's a lot of information out there already. So I'd stay mostly with the women of Pearl Harbor for that reason. When I did some research on the actual memorial that is sitting over the USS Arizona. It was started by public funds. It was not financed by the government. And the main thing was the money from the people that donated, and Elvis Presley did a special show to get money in for it. So it was built on that finances. How many people have been there? It means a lot, doesn't it? And then you see people that are not respectful, and you realize it's so hard. And I was on with the first time about 5 Pearl Harbor survivors. And then when I went back the second time, I just had Dick Schimmel. So it was very difficult for me. And now when I would go back again, I have no survivors that would be with me. So now we're going to start talking about the individual women. And USS Solace was a brand new ship that, well, it was a ship that was recreated into a hospital ship. It basically started out as a passenger ship in 1927, the USS Iroquois, and then it was commissioned as a hospital ship in August of 1941. So it was basically on its maiden voyage coming from Norfolk, Virginia, and finally arrived in Pearl Harbor about maybe a month before the attack on Pearl Harbor. Now, there were a lot of ships in the harbor at that time because the government sensed that something was happening. They didn't know quite what it was or when it would happen, but they just sensed that we need to get prepared. So there were more ships than normal in the harbor. The USS Solace was a white ship, as you see it there, and it's in with all the Navy men. Who's in Navy here? What color were your ships?
Gray.
Battleship dull gray.
Yeah.
And look at this, white ship sitting in the middle of all these gray ships. So it became the name, the White Swan and the Sea of Gray Ducks. That's how people remembered it. Now, there was no damage during the attack on Pearl Harbor other than a little bit of burning of the hull. But other than that, it was safe. Whether the Japanese were using it as a shield for their shooting or whether they said it's a hospital ship, we're not going near it, nobody really knows. It stayed in the harbor until March of 1942 when it sailed over to Samoa and became part of the Pacific Fleet. The first group of women were all the women that served on the Solace in 1941. And the lady that I'm going to concentrate on is Grace B. Lally. Now, I did have 3 ladies from Pearl Harbor that came from the coal regions, and Grace was one of them. She was from up in Ashland. And she was a very unique lady. When I tell you this story, you're going to have to think about it for a little bit. She was born in Ashland in 1897. And then she decided that she wanted an education in music. So she went down to Philadelphia and enrolled in one of the music schools in Philadelphia. And at that time, she became sick with an appendicitis. Now at that time, appendicitis kept you in the hospital for almost a week. And she realized that she fell in love with nursing. So she changed her mind, she came back, and she enrolled in Reading's St. Joseph's Hospital, right down the street from my house, in the old place. And basically, she became a nurse. And in 1918, she became a nurse and then went into the Army Nurse Corps. She served for a year in the Army and then decided to go back into civilian nursing. She served 2 years in civilian nursing and then realized that she really did love the military. So she decided this time she was ready for the Navy. So, Navy guys, she said, I saw the light, and I joined the Navy. Now, when you think about it, she was in World War I, she was in World War II, she was in the Army, she was in the Navy. How many men did the same thing? We have kind of an unusual lady here. Now, she did serve her whole entire career in the military. She retired in 1946 after 25 years of service in the Navy. And she retired down around Drexel Hill in Philadelphia. She decided that maybe it was time for her to do something that she never did the whole time she was in the Navy. She decided to go to the YWCA and learn to swim. Like I said, I have some good stories at times. Okay, Anna is the next person. And Anna was one of the youngest nurses on board the USS Solace. And I started reading her stories about her. I did know her a little bit about her before she died. She was another one of the coal crackers. So she went back and lived in the same area the rest of her life. And she was on the Navy ships, and up until the Navy allowed it, the women I don't think were allowed to become shellbacks. Should I say what a shellback is?
Yeah, sure.
Maybe I better ask him.
Well, a shellback is somebody that sails across the equator.
Yes,
In the Northern
now you're
Hemisphere.
being nice and clean about it.
Oh, is there something I missed?
To be a shellback as a man, you had to do all kinds of things that we don't want to know about. So I think that was what delayed the women becoming shellbacks. But guess what? She finally did. She finally did receive that beautiful medallion to show that she crossed the equator. So that is her little tribute. Now we're going to the hospital, the Naval Hospital, and it was a very small hospital. It was located right where the water comes in from the ocean into Pearl Harbor, where the ships enter. And you see the list of all the nurses that were on duty at that time. Now, the lady we're going to talk about next is the lady that introduced the president, Lenore Terrell Rickett. Now, Lenore was an officer. All these nurses had to be officers. And as an officer, you did not fraternize with the enlisted men. Guess what? She fraternized. Yes, she fell in love with the guy's name, Albert Bud Rickett. And Albert was in the Marine Corps. And he was stationed right before the attack on Pearl Harbor. He was sent over to Wake Island. And Wake Island was taken by the Japanese. So he became a prisoner of war for 5 years. Now, when the armistice came in 1945, he walked up to the person in charge and said, I am very much in love with this lady that I met years ago. Please get me in touch with her again. Well, they flew him directly into Bremerton, Washington, which is where she was stationed. And they told her that there was incoming wounded coming, and she was to meet the incoming wounded at the tarmac. So she went down, and suddenly here comes her Bud, slowly walking toward her. Well, they looked at each other, and they gave, I'm sure, a good hug and a kiss. And then he looked at her, and he said, we have so much catching up to do. They were married that same night. And they stayed married until his death in 1982.
Wow.
So it was an absolutely wonderful love relationship. the Hickam Army Hospital was within walking distance of Pearl Harbor. And it was a very small hospital. Basically, it was only opened about maybe a month before the attack on Pearl Harbor. And it was staffed on December 7th by only 5 nurses. So basically, I have the names listed, but the picture that was made for the Christmas card has a little bit more people on it. The lady that I'm going to focus on is the one in the middle of the picture. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 from the left. And that is going to be Annie Fox. Annie Fox was a lieutenant, the head nurse at Hickam, and she basically, my card's here. She basically won a Purple Heart. Now think about it. Purple Hearts were given to anybody that they felt deserved the Purple Heart. You did not have to be injured. And suddenly 2 years later, somebody realized how much of an error this was. And they said, please, if you had a Purple Heart and you were not injured, please return it. Well, she didn't want to, but she knew what the orders were, and she did return her Purple Heart. And in place, she got the Bronze Star. So basically, they both equaled the same thing. They showed honor for meritorious service, but the Purple Heart showed you were injured, the other one showed you were not injured. Now we're going to within walking distance of Honolulu, and that is going to be Tripler Army Hospital. And has anybody been to, how many people have been to Hawaii? Have you driven the H1? You know what I mean by the H1, the main drag that goes through, the main road that goes through? It didn't exist in 1941. In 1947, it was starting to be built. And they realized that where the Tripler Army Hospital was, that was exactly where they wanted to put the highway. So they moved the Tripler Army Hospital up to the top of the hill. And now when you go to Hawaii, you see this absolutely beautiful pink lady at the top of the mountain. So think about it. The one I'm talking about is down there within walking distance of Honolulu. It's not up in the mountains. So with that said, basically this was a 100-bed hospital. It was a little bit bigger than what we had for the Navy. Now we're going to start talking about the women again. Dorothy Eakins was a nurse at Tripler, and she was given the job of taking care of a man that was about maybe 19 years old. Think about what it was like if you were 19 years old and you just lost your arm. This man was in a state of panic, and she realized that. So she sat and talked to him and comforted him a little bit before she had to do her medical job of cutting off the hand and bandaging and taking care of him. Now he remembered this, and he saw an article about Dorothy in the Pearl Harbor Gram, the newsletter for the Pearl Harbor survivors. And he wrote to her and told her what happened, and she remembered who it was. And she said, please, she ran a ski lodge in Colorado at that time. And she said, please come and enjoy the ski lodge for a week as my treat. Well, about a week before this planned visit, Dorothy suddenly died. And her family realized how important this was to Dorothy, so they asked this man to also come, just like it was planned. When he arrived, the family gave him the actual scissors that was used to cut off his arm. Now, I hear groans. For him, it meant something very special to him. And you see, he had this plaque designed especially for that to honor Dorothy. So it meant a lot to be honored and to be saved by that lady. Now, Anna Erde was a nurse at Tripler, but she was also a patient that day. She had a very bad facial infection, and she was a patient in the women's ward at Tripler. Now, she heard the sirens go off, and she knew her job was to go take care of the patients. But now, would you want to be a patient and have somebody take care of you with a bright red face? The nurses decided this was not what needed to be. So they went and talked to their friend and said, it's better if you just stay in the women's ward. Somebody else will take your place, and we'll see what happens later. Well, she did recover a couple of weeks later, and she did serve quite a long time in the military, and she found her husband in the military. So she was going to be one of these women that did find her husband. Now, they went back to a national convention, the two of them, and she looks around and she said, well, I see lots of men. Where are the women of Pearl Harbor? Oh, they don't want to come. They're busy at home raising their families or whatever. They're not going to be interested. She changed their minds. She wrote to every one of those ladies and she said, please join. And she is one of the reasons why my mother joined the Pearl Harbor Association. She convinced a lot of them to come back. And basically, she was considered the person that was the organizer of the White Caps of Pearl Harbor, because all the nurses wore white caps, and that was the title given to them, the White Caps of Pearl Harbor. Teresa Stauffer remembered a baby
That
being
night, I don't
born.
even recall who the doctor was anymore, that he delivered a baby. I held a flashlight, he sutured it and everything, he delivered the baby. I thought to myself later, all the people being killed, and here we have fresh life coming in, and that was something to think of.
She remembered the baby being born, but she didn't remember the family. She didn't remember the name of the baby. She just remembered the baby. And that's all I knew growing up. So I decided a couple years ago that I was going to find out who this baby was. And it took a while, but I actually did find him. And he was Colonel David Burpee. He lives down in Virginia. And he told me that he was not the first baby born that day. He was the second baby born. So then he gave me the name of the first baby, which was Stan Lower, and he was from Oregon. So I contacted both these men and talked to them, and then found out they were going over for the 50th anniversary of, the 75th anniversary of Pearl Harbor. Now I was over there at the same time, but I was not at the same place. They were at the Hickam Air Force Base, and I was somewhere else. I never got to enjoy their 75th birthday party together. So great way to celebrate. I don't know if they're going to be around for the 100th, but they might come back for the 100th party. Now, Catherine Doty is now considered a Pearl Harbor survivor and a veteran that can be now sent over to Europe because she has battle experience. So they sent her over to England about a month after the attack on Pearl Harbor. She was on the same ship as General George Patton and all of his tanks, and I'm sure she had to wait until all the tanks were unloaded before she was able to get her medical supplies off the ship. But then she did set up an evac hospital on the in England. Now, years later, she did set up a MASH unit also. So she was one of these ladies that stayed in for her entire career. I like to jokingly say that I look at her as being the first Margaret Houlihan. I have no idea what it is like. Now we're going the whole way across the island, and we're going to Schofield Army Hospital. Now this was the largest army hospital on Oahu, and it started out in 1928 with like one building, and each year they would add another building on. So by 1941, you had almost the same configuration that you see on this picture. So on each of the edges of the buildings, you had a lanai, a porch, and the people would go out, the patients would go out and look at what was happening down on that recreation area. A lot of times they would watch the games being played or just see what was going on and enjoy the outside. So on December 7th, this is basically what was happening. Myrtle Watson was sitting out on the lanai with one of her patients, and suddenly this plane came flying over about the same height as this ceiling and was shooting bullets. And what do you do in that case? She stared up at you. So her patient realized what was happening and knocked her to the ground. And that is exactly where her bullet landed. And she saw this when she stood up and saved that bullet. So that's what you see here from that picture. She was a very lucky person. We had no women injured at all in Pearl Harbor. But some of the women that were over in the other islands, more toward Japan, they were taken captured. So I don't get into more than Pearl Harbor, but there were captured nurses, and they would take care of both the Japanese and their patients. So from that standpoint, we did have some very heroic nurses in the whole entire group of women. Now we're going to jump ahead 2 years. And if you think about it, most of these women served for 2 years, so they were ready to get out of the military and go back to regular nursing. Now we also had a war going on, and not too many women wanted to join because we're now in a war. And this is not the peaceful Hawaii that it was years ago. So it was getting very difficult to get nurses, and up to then, you had to be a single woman, unmarried, to be a nurse. So suddenly things had to change. So the rules were changed in 1943 that the women could be married, but God forbid if you had a child. That was the thing that's going to send you out of the military again. Things have certainly changed differently nowadays, haven't they? So Hermitina Scheppers was being married, and she married Ernie Whitesell. Now, she was at Schofield Chapel. He was, he drove a tank. And what are you going to do when you're married? You're going to go usually in a car or a Jeep around the island. Not her. Nope. He drove a tank. She had to ride a tank around the island. Now, she had another change in rules too. Women were supposed to be married in their uniforms. And she looked at the person in charge and she said, I want to be married in my wedding gown. And he looked at me and said, okay. I guess whatever she said worked beautifully because she was able to be married in this gorgeous wedding gown. So it was a nice trend. So she and her husband were the first people that were married officially and let her still be in the military. Now we're going to the directors of nursing. And when I talked about Anna Busby, there was, the one that lost, the one that had the red face, she became so popular over in Hawaii that her picture and her story is posted in the Arizona Memorial. She's the only woman in there. Now I'm fighting like crazy to get these women also in. These women came up as the lowest rank that you could have in the military and became the persons in charge of the entire Navy or Nurse Corps, Navy or Army Nurse Corps. So you can't deny that wonderful honor that they received. Winnie Gibson served from 1950 to 1954 in the Navy Nurse Corps, and Captain Ruth Erickson served from 1962 to 1966, also in the Navy Nurse Corps. Now, in the Army Nurse Corps, Mildred Clark served from 1963 to 1967. And at that time, she realized she had some men that were working as orderlies. And I think I just said the wrong word here. Corpsmen. They were working as corpsmen, but they were licensed nurses. And when they tried to get in as nurses, the rules said, oh, no, you have to be a woman. And here we had a man that had all the credentials of a registered nurse. So she went and lobbied for this and was able to change the rules that the men were able to now come into the military nurse corps. We also are going to salute their bravery. When you think about it, I am down to one person in Pennsylvania that is a Pearl Harbor survivor, and he is now 102. Isaac George lives out by Pittsburgh. In all of the United States, I think we're down to 20 people. So we're fast losing our whole entire survivors of Pearl Harbor. This is why I used her funeral to point that out, because it's something we have to think about. We have to keep their stories still alive, and it's so getting more and more difficult as we go along. Now, friendships. I think if I talk to a lot of the men here that were in the military, your friendships have stayed throughout all these years. I see that with even the women. The friendship stayed forever. And this is the friendship that I think you're going to suddenly realize how much friendship it was. Because remember what my name is. I am Winnie Carroll. There is my godmother, Winnie Walker. My mother is Teresa Stauffer. And now these two women were Pearl Harbor survivors. Winnie was stationed up at Schofield, and my mother was down at Tripler Army Hospital. They eventually did meet each other in the rotation of different assignments. And then 2 weeks after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, the military realized they needed more help. So they brought a boatload of nurses from stateside. And on that boat was Margaret Carroll. And Margaret Carroll somehow became friends with Teresa and with Winnie. So, need I say, they're both my godmothers. They're both my mothers there also. And I became Winnie Carroll Foster. So, I'm still that to this day, even though I stuck my own Woll name on the end. My mother went back in 1991 for the 50th reunion. She sensed that she was coming, I think, near the end of her life. And she had never been back to Hawaii since that 1941. And this was her desire. So our whole family went back. And I wrote to the company, to the hospital, asking if we could at least tour the hospital. and they realized this was something even better. They treated her like she was the commanding general. We drove around the island in the general's car. How we got around that day, I don't know. We toured the whole entire island. They had a dinner for her. She toured the hospital, and then she got in the car and went over to Schofield and toured that hospital. So it was just an absolutely wonderful time. Now, during this ceremony, she was in a meeting with these women, and in walks the commander of the general, and he has an entourage of about 10 people behind him, and he comes in and gives my mother the plaque that's sitting over there. I downsized it a little bit because of the heaviness of it, but he gave that to her, and my grandson, or my son, her grandson, was 16 at that time. Now he realized that Grandma was a wonderful lady, but he didn't realize that she was a military person too. And in walks the general. It took the life out of him. He was very, very shocked. He remembers that to this day. Now, basically in that picture, my mother was a great photographer. 20,000, I'm still going through rolls and rolls of film to develop. So the picture at the top was the one that she took. And then when we went back in 1991, as you see, the hotel was almost in the same spot where she had originally taken the picture. Not too much difference, except look at all the hotels. And then when I went back in 75 for the 75th anniversary, it's even worse than that picture. So it's becoming like New York City, that little tiny island thing. Now, you all have your songs. Everybody have your song sheets? Okay. I'm done talking. It's time for you to sing. I'm a music person. Well, now we got a problem here. Hold on, man. Let's play around with my toys. Are you ready? Second chorus. Let me go through first. This was a Sammy Kaye song. He wrote it. I get to say Mahala Nui Loa. Thank you very much for listening to my talk, and it's been a real pleasure being here with sharing my information with you. Thank you.
Thank you.